But you could just as easily move backwards in time or sideways in time, meaning that in that case you would be moving forward or backward in time depending on which direction you go, but not as fast as if you headed straight back or straight forward.
And how about the sideways?
Sideways would actually involve not only moving in a time direction, but also in a spatial direction as well. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, and I've tried to explain this to people for so long. People were having some trouble with it in the Rockies. It's not an easy thing to explain, but the way you need to look at this is that there are two parallel planes that exist everywhere in the universe. Everywhere you see stars, galaxies, nebula, you name it. Everything is superimposed on itself. You have space-time and you have time-space. And in order for any matter or particles or any energy whatsoever to occur, you have to have an interface between these parallel realities. The only reason why we see matter is because there's energy from space-time and energy from time-space that flow together. So you have parallel realities, both of which contribute energy, and the energy is counter-rotating. So the energy of space-time, which is what we're in, 3 dimensions of space and then 1 dimension of time that flows forward at an even speed, more or less. That space-time reality consists of energy. And then when that energy from our space-time blends with the parallel reality, which is completely inverted, meaning everything that's outside is on the inside and everything that's inside is on the outside. It's like you flip everything inside out, not upside down, inside out. So this inside-out reality counter-rotates against our reality, and those two energy forms come together as what we would think of as atoms and particles. Now the thing is that a particle over here, when we see it as a particle, it's a wave in time-space. It's spread out in time. And therefore, if we flip it over into time-space, it becomes a particle over there in this parallel reality that's right in the room with us right now, and it becomes a wave to us. So the scientists don't understand this, but as I say in the 2012 Enigma video, there were some scientists in Vienna, Austria, back in the late 90s, and they took this molecule of carbon, which is called a buckyball. It's 60 atoms of carbon that are all put together in what looks like a soccer ball. So this is a real particle of matter. This is not just some imaginary thing. And then they shoot this thing at a little slot, and because when it hits the slot, it shoots through the slot, it gets pushed inside out just by the kind of ripple effect that it has of going through a hole. And when it turns inside out, it turns into a wave. So then they can measure it as a wave, and yet again, it's a solid little object made out of 60 atoms of carbon. And more importantly, the DNA molecule is only twice as wide as a buckyball. So this little object that flips inside out when it goes through the portal is literally just almost as wide as DNA, and that again shows that DNA is also subject to the same quantum effects and can exist as a wave or a particle. Now, all of this stuff that I'm saying is a setup to get to the point that, again, in your room right now around you, you can look at all the objects in the room, you can see that they're solid, you can see that they exist. They also all exist in this parallel reality. Because remember, the parallel reality is the only reason why they can be formed. Their molecules, their atoms are formed by a counter-rotating interface between energy from our space-time and energy from time-space that's in parallel. So when you are looking at any matter around you, you're looking at something that exists in both planes at once. So because it's formed by energy from both.
And that would include us as well.
Absolutely, man.
Okay.
So when you go into a dream state, or when you go out of body, or when people are remote viewing, what they're actually doing is they're traveling through the time field. And because the energy of the time field builds the matter that's in our space-time, when you go into the time field, you can see everything that we have. You can see your toaster, you can see your oven, you can see your toilet, you can see the bathtub, the shower curtain. It's all going to be there. I mean, it tripped me out when I was a little kid, 5 years old. I had an out-of-body experience, and I was still wearing my pajamas that I had on in bed, and I couldn't understand why. I wouldn't have been naked or something. But the fact of the matter is that my astral body also is wearing the same clothes because those clothes are formed by the same energy that my astral body lives in. The only difference is that in the plane that my astral body lives in, I can levitate, and I have all these powers that I don't have in this physical reality, because the time field is not exactly the same. The time field has differences, and over there, you're in the afterlife. You could say that you're in the plane that you would go to if you went through a Stargate. So in a Stargate technology, you go there and you come back, you don't die. But and also if you have a dream or if you have an out-of-body experience, you're going there and not dying. But it's also the place that you go on a more permanent basis if you've died until you come back to another physical body again. So again, because the matter here is built from energy that's over there, when you go over there, you can see everything that's here. But the rules are different. And the reason why I say this is, remember when I was talking before about if you're sitting in your bedroom and you're listening to this radio show, and then you go walk into the bathroom, that you're actually traveling through time a little bit by doing that?
Yeah.
Well, in time-space, it's much more that way. In time-space, any distance that you travel around in over there is time travel over here. So if I were to be able to send myself into time-space so that my body disappears from physical sight, which is what would happen. If you transfer your full energy from one plane to the other, then you become invisible to this plane because now you've basically turned into a wave here. In other words, there would still be some possible luminosity. There might be a glow or a haze, and of course, what does that make you think of right away? Ghosts, right? Ghosts are people that are over there who stay in one place long enough that they temporarily become visible over here. So, in other words, this time-space is a parallel reality. It's very real, and you can go over there, and if you enter in at one location and then you travel around in space over there, you've traveled the equivalent of time over here. So then if you warp out of that place and you come back here, you've actually traveled either forwards or backwards in time to some degree. But it seems like all you did is walk around. So one of the examples of this that proves it in a real-world context was in roughly 1969, around that time, there was a National Airlines 727 airliner, and it was flying into the Miami airport. Well, the Miami airport is right next to a very popular tabloid thing, which is the Bermuda Triangle, in which these effects happen sometimes. People have had ships and planes disappear right while they're flying through the air. Well, that's exactly what happened in this case. This plane is flying through the air in the Bermuda Triangle, coming into the Miami airport. It disappears off the radar for 10 minutes. The tower goes nuts because they were in radio contact. It's a clear day. All of a sudden, the plane is gone. They don't have any optical contact. They don't have any radar contact. They scramble airliners out there to look for it. They scramble ships on the sea to go sail out and look for it. Nobody sees anything. There's no flotsam on the water. There's no oil slicks. There's no seats, no bodies, nothing. It's gone. So everybody's going crazy, and then all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, the plane shows up in exactly the same spot that it disappeared in. Just spontaneously rematerializes. The guy that was in the cockpit didn't notice any time had elapsed. He's actually 1 minute talking to the guy at the tower, and everything's fine. Then all of a sudden, the guy at the tower is screaming, and he's like, "What's wrong with you?" And he says, "We haven't been able to contact you for 10 minutes. And he says, "What are you talking about? You were just talking to me. You were in the middle of a sentence, and then all of a sudden, now you're screaming." So they had no idea what happened. So the government gets all freaked out. The plane lands, and the Black Ops people have them land in a separate area on the airport tarmac. And they send in personnel to find out what the hell happened. And, of course, nobody on the plane knew that anything was wrong. But once they looked at the clocks, they discovered that all the clocks were 10 minutes slow. So if it's 5:55 p.m., at the Miami airport, everybody's watch said 5:45 p.m., meaning that they lost those 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes never happened on their watches. They literally just they were at 545 when it was 545 for us. They popped through this time vortex. It's still 545 for them, but it's now become 555 for us. And all they had to do that is fly through this little vortex that happened to be small enough that it only popped them 10 minutes forward into the future. So this is a real-world example that's documented. It's in a number of books. It's in a book by Charles Berlitz called The Bermuda Triangle. It's in a book by Martin Caden called Ghosts in the Air, which actually has the most detailed account of it. So there's several different books you can find this in.
So this is the thing that's happening with the dinosaurs.
Right. So what you have with the dinosaurs gets back to my earlier discussion regarding the 6.2 million year cycle I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What did I say about that cycle? I said that every 6.2 million years the planets line up in the same position. We also know that there is a greater harmonic, which is that every 10 cycles of 6.2 million years is obviously 62 million years. And when you get that cycle, you have the time that it takes for all these major evolutions to occur on the planet in terms of the fossil record. In other words, a UC Berkeley scientist named Dr. Robert Rode went back to the dawn of all life on Earth. 542 million years ago is when the first little bacteria and single-celled organisms appeared in the fossil record. It created what's known as the Cambrian era. That's the beginning of all fossils. From this point forward, you can count every 62 million years, and for some strange and unknowable reason to the mainstream world, every 62 million years, all of the life forms on Earth spontaneously upgrade their DNA and become new creatures. And it's called evolution, but if you try to support Darwin and say that it's all based on random mutation, it seems highly unlikely that random mutation would suddenly just decide to spontaneously change at 62 million year intervals. It's even weirder that this 6.2 million year cycle, the only reason why we know that it exists is because it was on Sumerian cuneiform tablets.
Yep,
that's where the number was found.
Mm-hmm.
And it was found by the director of communications for the Apollo missions to the moon. This guy's name is Maurice Chatelain. And he was the one who was, as director of communications, he was primarily responsible for making enormous calculations of how many seconds it would take to do these huge orbits. If you think about an orbit that lasts, let's say, 6 months, if you're going to go out to a distant planet or with a satellite or something, or even longer than 6 months, the number of seconds in that time is huge. And the only way you can really get precise calculations is to do it in seconds. You don't want to do minutes because then it's much less precise, and then you have to figure out hours and all that stuff. So seconds is what they use for any calculations with space probes. Now, this man also came forward later on and confessed that he had been shown pictures of bases on the moon that are not built by humans from Earth, and debriefed on the fact that we found all this architecture up there that we didn't build. So as a result of that, he was sworn to secrecy, but then he became very interested in the idea of extraterrestrial civilizations interfacing with Earth. The most obvious one is, of course, the Sumerian tablets because of all the legends of the Anunnaki.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes and does his homework and goes and finds these tablets that the archaeologists had written off and said, oh, this is just a bunch of numbers. The Sumerians were just obsessed with numbers, but they didn't know what these numbers meant. They just liked to write them down on paper, or on the equivalent of paper back then. So Chatelain goes in there and says, maybe this is not just bullshit. So he goes in there and he looks at the numbers and he starts calculating what they are in seconds and finds, sure enough, that one of these numbers expresses exactly how long it takes. It's 6.2 million year cycle for all the planets to realign. So what that means is you can take any planetary orbit in the solar system, orbit of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, doesn't even matter which one you take, and you divide the length of time that it takes that planet to go once, you divide that into the master number that the Sumerians gave you, and it will divide up perfectly. So it's like if you have 12 dozen eggs,